Welcome to episode 76 of the Camerosity podcast, the world's one and only open source film photography podcast. My name is Mike Ekman, and we are back with another episode. So hide your wallets and your credit cards, as some gas is sure to follow. Tonight, we are going to talk about something that every one of us knows a bit about: buying and selling cameras. If you've ever wanted to know how guys like the Camerosity hosts come across so many cool cameras, this episode is for you, as we'll reveal everything we know. Before we get to that, though, let's do some introductions. Starting us off from Yellow Springs, Ohio, is Dave Chappelle's neighbor, Mr. Paul Reibel. Hey, Paul, when was the last time you saw Dave?
I saw him at the bank not long ago. He hangs around. I mean, he doesn't hide, but nobody bothers him, so that he likes that.
Next, from Sydney, Australia, is Mr. Theo Panagopoulos. Hey, Theo, did I hear that you had some computer gas recently?
I'm eagerly awaiting the new iPhone 16 now, actually, because it's got a shutter button on it.
And finally, from Gainesville, Florida, is Mr. Anthony Rue. Hey, Anthony, how are you doing on your quest to own another Leica M camera?
Well, I am trying to divest myself of some classic vintage synthesizers so that I can afford one. And I think it's actually going to happen. I've got it out with a couple of musicians who are making it go whoop, 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 and they're quite excited about it. So I think it's actually going to happen.
All right. Well, we got a few guys in the waiting room, so let's open up the doors and let them in. All right, I see some familiar faces. Mark Faulkner, welcome back, Mark.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Will Pinkham, it's been a little bit, but good to see you back. So this episode, the guys and I were thinking about what we want to talk about, and something that we're always doing, like we forget about the day in and day out tasks that we do, and we kind of all realized that we've all had like little tips and tricks that we've come up with, and everybody likes hearing stories about like awesome pickups. And, this being the internet, we love scandals. So people sometimes like to hear about some of the worst pickups you've ever had. What are some horror stories that you've had buying things from people? It doesn't have to be eBay. I mean, obviously, that's what I think people tend to gravitate towards. But there's other ways to get cameras and things and such. So I feel like, that's a area ripe for discussion. I don't know. I mean, we've all talked about auctions. We've talked about picking up things from estate sales. I guess I'll just start with Paul. Of the four of us hosts, you're the one that's done the most buying and selling. What does the market look like today, maybe compared to recently? Like, is it on the upswing? Is it on the downswing? What do you think?
Well, sales are off. So, I mean, if you're talking about eBay,
sure,
eBay is very slow. Traditionally, it's slow in the summertime anyway. But as far as purchases are concerned, I'm really trying not to buy anything. Cody Yoder has joined us. He's down here in the bottom of the screen. I just bought some cameras from Cody for the second time. The first time I want him to tell the story. We've all got stories about how we got amazing batches of stuff. And to me, that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as buying it real cheap. Sure. It means finding cool stuff. I personally am a big believer in karma. I don't want to cheat somebody. If I cheat somebody, I feel like I'm poisoning the well. So I want to pay a fair price for stuff. And, and that holds true when you're buying it from an individual. When you're buying it from an estate or something that people don't know, that you're not taking advantage of somebody. You've lucked into a situation. That's something else. Cody got the best deal I think I've ever heard of anyone getting. I'm going to let him tell you what he did and how this all came about, because it's really interesting.
It's been a wild ride. I appreciate the time and the invite to come here. So I purchased my first film camera around August 2022 after moving to mid-Missouri. And my wife and I, at the time, had a trip to Europe planned for the spring of 2023. So I thought, hey, why not try out, bringing a film camera. Try to capture some of the best scenes on film. So I got on Facebook Marketplace, got in contact with a guy and just wanted a, generic classic looking camera that fit the bill, and ended up getting a Minolta SRT 102. And so that was what I brought to Europe. It was great. But in the meantime, so I was trying to practice with, getting film photography experience. This naturally, sparked an obsession and I wanted to gas in general, and so I set off to acquire just a simple tripod. So I go to Facebook Marketplace and I see a pretty crappy looking listing for they were like stacked in a garage like cordwood, a bunch of tripods. And so I went ahead and messaged the guy and I got over there and it was an absolute disaster of a construction zone. The seller, he led me into a garage. It was just crammed with a bunch of stuff. It looked like an episode of Hoarders. It was just old, cruddy, musty. So he leads me over to where the tripods were, and I picked up a Gitzo, and I didn't know what a Gitzo or a Manfrotto or whatever these, high name brands were at the time. So I said, hey, this will do good for an SLR setup, whatever. I think it was like $30 that he wanted. And so I asked just as an aside whether he had any more cameras. And he said, well, yeah, actually we do. And it was like I had tunnel vision. He just like gestured to the backside of the garage. And lo and behold, there's like racks, like just shelves of cameras. But everything had been moved to make room for his, he was refurbishing the house and was going to flip it. It was not the original owner, it turned out. So this guy was, he just purchased the home and the seller had left his whole lifetime supply of film photography equipment in this house, along with most of his life's work on slide film. I mean, everything from like the mountains of Pakistan to, mid-Missouri fall foliage. Like it was crazy what I saw. And I saved what I could of it, but it was just boxes and boxes of slide film. But I mean, with that, I have like an itemized list. I can just start rattling stuff off. It was insane what I came across. And mind you, I had like 2 months of experience, owning a Minolta SRT at the time. But some of the stuff, I mean, there was 2 Hasselblad bodies, 3 lenses, various accessories for the Hasselblad, Pentax 6.7 with the wood grip, point and shoots, you name it, Olympus XA2, the rolling mat, autofocus, just various SLR equipment. I mean, I had to dig for weeks in this guy's garage, and he was kind enough to let me do it. But it was just an incredible experience.
You were able to keep going back then?
Yeah. So, and that was like a concern during the time was like, I didn't know if there would be other sleuths on Facebook
Right.
Marketplace that would kind of get.
Sure.
But the thing was like, he took really poor pictures, so I didn't have much of a concern in that regard. But there was no telling, like, if somebody was to catch on. I wanted first dibs, and he understood too at the time. I mean, he was in the trades, and we both wanted this stuff to go to, like, we wanted to carry it on to its next life, and I told him that I wanted to use it if I could, and if I couldn't, I'll figure something out. And that's kind of where I got in contact with Paul, because I made him an offer. Here's the kicker of the whole story. I made him an offer of $500. He immediately accepted, and basically anything that was film or photography related in the garage was fair game, and I could take it home, and I did. And my wife she was not happy at the time. That would be really good.
Well, a lot of the stuff was really dirty too.
It was, and that
Cody
was the
cleaned
next
it.
thing.
Cody cleaned it up. I mean, you did an excellent job.
Yeah.
But there were the weird thing about it was really mismatched. There were 2 Arca Swiss view cameras, Model 1s, that were the pieces were totally random. I mean, they had no relationship to each other on the cameras. The last thing I just got from Cody was this Hasselblad, which is a 503CX. Okay, a 503CX is a later body. It has a C lens on it, which dates back into the 70s. It has a black waist level finder on a silver camera, and it has a 12 exposure back rather than an A12 back. So the only piece that matches this body, the only piece that's on it that should be there is the focusing screen.
When I opened up it was in like a luggage, like a briefcase sort of thing. And it was, you guys probably know, like over time, the foam just melts. It's that petroleum-based foam from the 70s or whatever. And I spent 3 months with Q-tips trying to get all that junk off those Hasselblad. So it was wild.
So how did you connect with Paul? Did you know him from before this?
No, I did not. So I was listening to the podcast. I was familiar with the podcast, and
Okay.
I shot him once I made this deal. I basically shot him a message over Facebook Messenger and thought he would never respond. But like the next day he did. I said, man, I need to get you on Zoom or like video chat or something to show you what I have. And yeah, that's how we got in contact.
So you paid $500 for everything in the garage. You took whatever you
Yeah.
wanted. You spoke to Paul. Now, Paul's, like you mentioned earlier, he's a very honest guy, and I'm not asking for numbers, but obviously he bought some of this stuff off you. So describe your wife's change of opinion from what you originally invested into this to where you're at now.
Things worked out well. But I don't want to. We're talking, 4x returns tops. I mean, it really wasn't super significant. I kept a lot. That's one reason I've
Well,
sold
sure.
some to Paul, and the other thing is I've gone to Reddit and I've donated some of the proceeds of some of my transactions to charity. So
That's great.
that's been a good part of it.
Yeah, we've all got, I mean, there's always stories of weird things that when you buy and sell. And I don't buy much on Facebook Marketplace. So occasionally something will happen. And I bought a guy listed a Hasselblad and a couple lenses, and it was pretty obvious that he didn't know what he had. So we were just chatting, and he said, "Can I call you?" Well, that's a red flag. You don't ever want anyone to call you. You want to stay away from anybody having any personal information on how to find you. But this guy was so innocent that I agreed, and so I gave him my phone number. Well, he calls and he says, "Well, here's the thing. I don't know what the condition is." And I thought, "Oh shit! Now what is he going to want to do?" And he says, "I'm going to send you the cameras, and then you pay me for them when you get them." And I thought, "Okay." And I said, "Okay, here's what we do. You send them to me. I'll send you back money." I said, "But don't ever do this again. Don't ever offer to send somebody stuff without something that makes you know you're going to get paid." So he did, and we did, and everything worked out fine for both of us. But it was just I think it might be the only time that's ever happened.
Yeah.
I've had situations where I sent people stuff, or they sent me stuff. I had paid for it in advance, and then I would send them more money. I've never had a situation where I felt like I overpaid for something. Probably generally because they don't pay enough to start with.
And that all came from Paul's reputation on this show, right? So,
Well, I haven't ruined my rep. I haven't blotted my copybook that bad yet, but it's just a matter of time.
Like I say, that reminds me, Paul, we'll send you the invoice for the advertising, mate. I mean,
Right,
we're
right,
a bit behind on the advertising fees here.
right. Well, one of the things Cody got on that batch was a Pentax 6x7. That I think you kept that at this point.
Yeah, it's serviced and I haven't used it in a minute, but I intend to
You
keep
sent
that.
it down to the Pentax guy.
I did. Yep.
Yep. Yeah.
And I thought those Hasselblads were well, the one that I kept, even as mismatched as it was, I thought that was gonna be like an heirloom piece, but I don't know. I think Anthony was the same way. He just didn't mesh with the Hasselblad. I think I've heard him mention that. But
yeah.
yeah, I had to part with it.
Yeah, it's just one of those cameras that, I mean, I probably handled 4 or 5 at this point, and I just can't mess with that camera. I don't get into the workflow. Which is funny because I loved the Rolly SL66 that Paul had me check out from a buyer here in Gainesville. There was a local seller, and Paul had me make sure it was working before he bought it. I fell in love with that camera, but and sensibly you would think that if I liked that, I'd like the Hasselblad, but it was chalk and cheese. It was a completely different user experience.
Yeah, and the thing about it was is like as much stuff that I had, I knew that it had to move on, and I let stuff go in bulk, not the good stuff, but I let a good chunk of things go in bulk just to see it onto its next home because this was just wild, the stuff that I come across.
That's great. I love hearing stories like that. And I love, like you just said, getting the stuff into the right hands, right people.
Mike, you got a good deal on an Icon.
Yeah, it was there was a website called estatesales.net where you could sign up for, like, it'll alert you to estate sales in your area. You could also like plug in like a keyword and it would alert you if that keyword shows up in an estate sale. So I just had the word camera. And you'd get like the Instamatics and brownies and such all the time, Polaroids a lot. And one time it was like vintage lot cameras, and they always show really low quality, low resolution, muddy, poorly lit images, and half the time you can't even tell what it is. And they showed a couple tables worth of just random crap cameras, but then I saw a few blue velvet boxes, but I couldn't tell what was written on them. I couldn't tell what was in them or if there even was anything in them. And I went entirely on a hunch that a blue velvet cardboard box means an Nikon rangefinder. And this particular estate sale was on the south side of Chicago, like southwest side, and which is a decent hike, through not the best area. So I drove all the way out there. I left work early, and I had to wait in line. I wasn't the first person there, but I was not there long enough to where the line had dispersed. So it's like crap, like I'm hoping that I can get in there and the stuff will still be there. So I get in the house and, I always try to have that mental picture in my head of like what I saw on the website so that I know where in the house I need to look. And I get to the room that had all the cameras, and sure enough, the blue boxes just were missing. They weren't where they were in the original pictures because a lot of times they take those pictures days or even weeks in advance. So I'm poking around looking. In another room, though, I found the blue boxes, and it was a Nikon S2, three different lenses, all in excellent condition. There was a 35 and 85, and I think a 135. And they all had the auxiliary like clip-on viewfinders, which usually end up getting lost. They all had the EP marking, the post exchange marking, which doesn't really increase the value of anything, but the fact that every single thing had it, in my opinion, suggests that they were probably all bought at the same time. My guess is this guy was in the service and probably bought stuff, while serving overseas, probably just spent some money on an entire kit. And while I didn't know the person, don't know the guy's name, anything about him, it is kind of cool to like have that sort of collection. And I still have every piece of that. So, and it was in great condition. And I think I paid, I think it was like $300 for everything, excellent, excellent condition. So, I mean, that was a great pickup. And what I ended up doing was I had another S2 that wasn't in as of nice condition. And rarely do I like to keep duplicates of the same model. So I ended up selling my original S2 now that I had a much nicer one. And I think I got like $300 for it. So like my net cost on it ended up being zero. But that was a good one, just kind of like yours, Cody, in the sense like you don't really know what you're going into, and it ends up working in your favor. But it's important to remember that every time you hear a guy like us talk about a story like that, there's 99 other times where it doesn't work out or there's just nothing of interest there. And like you said too, Paul, eBay slowing down. The sales are dropping a little bit more than the typical summer. I just, for some reason, I'm not seeing the estate sales with anything anymore. It's almost like the first wave of old cameras have been picked up by collectors, and we're kind of in like a lull of stuff sort of showing up. But I don't know.
Well, it's like for me, and I think it's the same for Bob Rotoloni. Your existing customers, people know you at this point. So
Yeah,
when things become available, when a friend or an acquaintance or somebody has something they want to sell, they contact you. And that's where I would say right now, probably 90% of the stuff I buy comes from people that I've known for quite a long time. Like Cody, I just got some stuff from a buddy in LA that we've been doing business for many years. Don't you find that to be true, Bob?
it doesn't look like we're going to be able to hear from Bob unless he can figure it out. But I know he's told me, how you described it, Paul, is pretty accurate. His reputation, he's been doing this such a long time. And you've even said too, Paul, like prior to 3-4 years ago, people knew you either from your eBay store or you dabbled in Etsy for a little while, but then also your old camera store. You would said like
Right.
ex-customers would call you up
Yeah,
and
old customers.
they would sell you back things that you sold to them before.
Exactly. And the other thing that I did was, and this is something that really was fun to a certain extent. I ran an ad in our local daily newspaper every day for like 10 years that said local camera collector pays cash for Leica, Nikon, and other cameras. Call Paul at blah, 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 blah. And over the years, I probably got a week, I would probably get 10 or 12 calls. Out of those 10 or 12 calls, it would be maybe three purchases that I would make. But they were all good and they were all fun, and some of them were pretty dangerous actually because it was situations that if I had known what I was getting into, I wouldn't have done it. But it was one of those things that I got a lot of junk. I mean, I would get calls from people that had Polaroids and brownies and Minolta talk or point and shoot cameras and things like that, video cameras, movie
Sure.
cameras. But then occasionally you'd get a Leica or a Nikon or something that was more interesting. And a lot of times it would be larger collections. So you would not only get what a camera and lenses, but you would get a lot of accessories. And it turns out, it's the bottom of the box is where all the fun stuff is, because people put the crap in a box and then the good stuff, the accessories work their way to the bottom of the box. So you always want to make sure you look in the bottom of the box. The two prime examples were I found an adapter from Orion that was the old Miranda company to mount Contax lenses, Nikon or rangefinder lenses on Leica thread mount cameras. I found one of those in the bottom of a box. Those sell for around $1,600. The second thing I found was called an Onyx, which is a lens hood for Leica for the 35 1.4 stainless steel rim lens. It's extremely rare. I found one of those in the bottom of a box last fall. They're so expensive. I mean, they're almost unobtainium in cost. But that's the fun stuff that you find when you get into them. I got a lens from Cody that was sort of cool. It was it came on the Arca Swiss, but it was a apolanthar, which is very, very rare and very expensive. Unfortunately, this one had terrible element separation. So I wound up wholesaling it to a guy in China who had the ability to separate the elements and reglue them. There's no one in the U.S. that'll do that anymore.
Well, Pinkham, you've been in on the show before. It's been a couple episodes, but do you have any stories for us?
I have all stories of misfortune, really.
Those are
Those
fun
can be
too.
fun. They may not be fun for you, but sometimes it's fun to hear about.
Yeah, let's hear them, Will.
Generally, I don't collect a lot of really expensive cameras. Like for me, a lot of the fun is, going to flea markets or thrift stores and just finding, I don't know, neat things or things I like. Occasionally, if I'm really into something, I'll try eBay or look for something, but usually not too crazy. Marketplace is new to me, and I was looking, I don't know what I was looking for on Facebook Marketplace, and I was like, oh, cameras, maybe that'd be great. And so, kind of not exactly like Cody's story, there was a guy on there, and he was a young guy, and he just had like hundreds of camera stuff, and it was just boxes, and he's like, I just want to get rid of it for I think like $100 or $150, $200. Probably more than I normally would spend, but I'm looking through these pictures and I'm like, there's so much. There's, some of it was great. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to get it. And I messaged the guy. I'm like, right away, the whole thing. And he's like, yeah, sure, sure, sure. And he's like, I'm in Pennsylvania. He's like, I'll be up in your area on the weekend. So I made all the arrangements. I'm messaging like, kind of every day, touching base and everything. And, the weekend goes around, the day we're supposed to meet, and it's just a like ghost. And I'm like, hey, totally ready to be there, and never heard another thing. And I'm sure someone scooped it up because, anyone who was really looking for cameras would have known there was a lot of decent stuff in there, And for me, it would have been just for myself. And then, I think I'm the same way. I want to make sure camera equipment gets in the hands of people who want to use camera equipment, I've former students or people that are just getting into it, and I'm like, sure, here, take this camera, take this bag, go use it, give it back. But so I don't know. And every time I'll think I'm getting a good deal, and I just miss it. There was a Leica lens at an auction one time that was in a box of just nothing else, and I was like, oh, that would be cool. And I think it was a thread mount. I have an old Canon thread mount. And as I'm watching the auction, you can see the people go by, and with our phones, everyone starts typing in Leica because everyone knows Leica. And next thing you know, the lens shifted boxes a couple times, and I don't know who got it, but I didn't get it. So, but that's my luck.
My best thing that got away, or just misfortune, I don't know if it's even misfortune because it was just due to my own ignorance, but when I had just barely started getting into cameras and I didn't know much of anything, and I didn't have a budget. My wife wasn't on board with me buying this stuff and, understanding that I can flip things and make profits and such. So, I would aim for like $20, $30 cameras. There was a guy that advertised, he was in Chicago. He was in like the Fulton Market area, which for anybody who knows Chicago is slightly on the west side. It's one of those areas that there's patches that are rough, but there's other patches where they're really building it up. Google has headquarters out there. Parking's a nightmare. So he said he had a whole collection he was selling, and I drove down there. It took me forever to find parking. To get to where this stuff was, it was in like this nondescript warehouse where you go up like a freight elevator to some floor and you walk down this aisle. And I remember walking down the aisle and it was a very strong scent of weed, lingering in the air. And I knock on this door. I'm like, man, there's either going to be a lot of cameras behind here, or I'm going to get murdered. Thankfully, it was a bunch of cameras, but like I remembered over the years thinking back to that day, like I didn't know what I was getting myself into because the dude had a lot of really cool stuff. And it was a lot of stuff that, like today, if that happened, I would have spent a pretty penny on some stuff, flipped a few things, made some deals here and there. But like he had like rollies, 50, $100. I concentrated on all like the cheap stuff, the $5, $10 table. But I mean, I just remember thinking he had so much stuff there that at the time I didn't even know what it was. But I just visualized being in that room thinking if I would have been there with the knowledge I have now, I would have done some real damage. But I wish I could go back to that day because that's really the only time as a buyer I walked into a large collection of stuff. I've found estate sales where somebody was like a photographer and had just like random stuff in their house, some cool things here and there. I had one where this person had a crap load of expired film, some of it really good, some of it not, worth nothing. But I made an offer, I think $50 for every single thing. And he had pro packs of 120, all this, bulk reels and such like that with film still in it. And so that was a great pickup then too. But I've never had that similar experience like what Cody talked about, where you walk in, it's like a collection of stuff from somebody where they're just trying to liquidate it. But I wish I could go back in time and give myself the knowledge, that I had then.
I mean, I had all of 2 months, quote unquote experience at the time.
Yeah,
I was just starting to dig into Reddit. I was looking on Reddit analog community and like looking at what the popular cameras are. I was like,
yeah,
that is a boxy camera and that looks like a Hasselblad.
sure.
Like, I'm just making like small connections at the time. So it was interesting.
Anthony and I have a mutual friend, a guy that lives down near him, that got a similar deal to what Cody got. Right, Anthony?
You're talking about Miguel.
Yeah.
Yeah. He is a friend of mine here in Gainesville who was just one day like flipping through a Facebook Marketplace ad, and he saw a picture of somebody that was like camera collection for sale, $2,500 takes all. And he's like looking at it thinking, that can't be right. And so he immediately like messages them and said, let me call you. And he's like, are you sure it's $2,500 for everything that's in the picture? And the guy's like, yeah, sure. So Miguel said, okay, I'll buy it. I'll send you the money, and I'm going to, I'll be there on Monday. It was a guy up in Missouri, and we're down in Gainesville, Florida. And Miguel rented a U-Haul and put it on the back of his truck and drove up. And it was a guy who was a Rolei super collector. And I couldn't even tell you what all he had in his collection. It was, I mean, I tried to help Miguel sort of sort through it afterwards, but it was hundreds and hundreds of cameras. And it was like two SL 66, including a very limited edition one. It was Paul, what's the other high end?
Well, I got the SL66X.
Yeah, but what was the other model?
The SLX.
The SLX. He had the SL66. They had the like 7 or 8 of Rolleiflexes and roller cords and Rolly Magics, and they all worked. But it was also things like, there was like a absolutely new in the box, perfectly working Olympus SP with an active meter, and it was just boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of point and shoots. Like we couldn't even begin to catalog all the point and shoots. But he literally filled up a.
Where in Missouri was this?
There was a guy who was like, he had died, and his son was like, the guy was like a mega collector, and and like they were not that concerned about the cameras because Miguel was like, he had like a barn of motorcycle collections and a barn of car collections, and this guy had these like, he was like a mega collector, and they had stuff of quantifiably much more value than the cameras. And they just wanted to get the cameras out of there so that they could focus on the high dollar products that the guy had collected.
And the cameras, he had Rolly 35s.
Oh yeah.
like brand new in the box, Rolly 35s.
I think
Go,
he had every lens that had ever been made for the Rolly 35.
yes.
He had everything down to like a 7 millimeter, which was like a a saucer sized lens. They had a 400 millimeter. I mean, it was just like everything in between. I think he's got a table that has like over 15 50 1.4s for the Rolly 35.
Yeah, it was scary. I mean, I saw the list and it was
If
uh
only he had some working 110 roll eyes, though.
Oh,
yeah, oh
he
boy.
had he had a stack of like seven new in the box, never opened, Rolly 110s. And I really wanted one. And I worked through every single one of them, and every single one of them had a broken frame advance. Like you could not you would advance the film once or twice, and then the frame advance would just stop. So did not get a single Rolly 110 out of that batch. And interestingly enough, he also had like the entire run of Minox 35s, including the titanium one and the Gulf green one and the white one and all the variants. It was just a very eclectic collection, but it took over the guy's house. I mean, he couldn't even he had no place to sit down to watch TV after he brought that collection home because he lived in a fairly small apartment and it was just boxes everywhere.
Well, I got the Rolly SL66X
Yeah,
from him. I got one of them. I think he had two because he's got one
He did.
currently for sale also. But I bought some of this stuff and traded him for some stuff. But maybe it's Missouri. I found in fact, Cody sent me this. Cody sent me, he said, this guy had some Leica stuff for sale, and he was about 20 miles south of St. Louis. And Cody is in the middle of Missouri. So Cody said, I think I'm going to go look at some of this stuff. Are you interested in any of it? Well, I looked at it, and there was a 19 millimeter lens, which is, just realistically a $1,200 lens. And he wanted 400 for it. So I thought, you know what? Maybe I ought to talk to this guy. So I talked to him, and I wound up it's 406 miles from my house to his house. And I did a turnaround. I left home at like 6 o'clock in the morning, drove to his place, got there about noon, 1 o'clock, bought the stuff from him, everything he had. It was thousands of dollars, and drove home. It was a 13-hour day, 812-mile round trip. And it was all Leica SLs, black paint, lenses. There was nothing except Leica that I got. I mean, it was like not like a rangefinders. It was like SLRs, but it was a lot of really fun stuff.
For anyone who's buying to resell, what's the kind of like markup you're looking at? Like, what percentage are you paying for an item that you think that you would sell again?
Well, you
As
you got
opposed to
to. So I
normal?
start at the other end. I know if I want to sell something for $100, my fee is going to be the fees I'm going to pay for almost anybody is 10%. So if I sell it for $100, then I'll actually clear about 90, and then I got to pay income tax on that, which is probably another 10%. So all of a sudden you're down to about $80. Well, then what if you buy something and it doesn't work? You got to get it repaired. So that doesn't happen all the time, but it happens often enough. So if I
it
try to
happens enough
figure
that
out,
Paul gets Christmas cards from his repair guys.
oh yeah, my repair
That
guys
was my
love me.
next question. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
You repair stuff.
if I'm going to sell something for $100, I'd like to have $55 to $60 in it. No more than 60, no less than probably 50. That protects me.
And what the benefit that you have, Paul, is your reputation, from the three-prong reputation from your store, from your eBay, world, and this show, which is clearly a factor in it too, because people will expect that stuff that you have is going to be good. You're not selling junk, and you stand behind everything you sell. And in the event something just slips through the cracks, they know that they're going to get their money back from you. But there's still always people who are looking to scam the system. And that's where selling on eBay has become unfortunately problematic, even for you. But for someone without your reputation, just some random person, it's hard too, because you could describe something as best as you possibly can. And you could even say, like, I had a camera I sold, and I was honest. I said, this camera does not work. The shutter's stuck on it. It doesn't fire. Viewfinder is hazy. sold as is, parts only. I mean, I don't know how much more I could have explained that this camera didn't work. And the guy got it and wanted to return it because he said the lens was wobbly. Like, it was a rangefinder and the lens was wobbly on it. He goes, that can't be fixed. And I'm like, and he said, you didn't say that in the description. And it's like, well, okay, you're right. I didn't say that, those exact words, but like, do I need to go through like a checklist of every possible thing and explain it to the T? But he wanted his money back, and eBay, you have to do it. Like, you can't not do it. But then you eat the shipping. So if I want to then sell that camera again with a different description, I now have to clear more money I did the first time to cover the losses that I had then too. So to answer your question, Will, if you're trying to sell something and you want to make that mental calculation in your head, if I'm going to flip this, what do I need to pay to even make it worth my while? That distance can be quite big. And I think sometimes people get offended when they think, oh, well, I looked on eBay and this camera sells for 500 and you're offering them three, or 350. And they're like, well, that's not even close. It's like, but that's what it costs to be able to sell this.
I've never sold anything. I've only bought, and a lot of times the items aren't very, in my opinion, not very expensive to begin with. And so I always think, well, if I'm going to turn around and try and sell some stuff so I can buy something different, am I really going to make anything at times? And I
Yeah,
think what you mentioned about, I feel like there's more and more people now that, complain about a tiny thing, want their money back, want to
sure.
send it back, and they're not as into getting something that's like, oh, I'll work with this or I'll figure it out. And I don't know, I become real hesitant to try and sell anything.
Yeah, I don't have many returns, but I am in trouble with eBay right now, and it's my own fault. When we started working on Kurt's stuff, my store got overloaded. I had 850 items at one time. I'm down to 630 right now, but I had so many pieces that I was not careful enough in checking it. So there were several things that happened, and I would either miss that something wasn't as described, or I couldn't find something. I mean, a little Nikon flash shoe. I simply couldn't find it because I had so many pieces. Well, what happened was I had too many orders that I canceled. And eBay considers that to be a defect. If you cancel an order that the buyer didn't ask to cancel, if you canceled it because you were out of stock, or for some reason it wasn't working, or for any other reason you cancel the order, they count it as a defect. If that reaches 2% of your total, they drop you to what they call below standard. I had 740 sales. I shipped every one of them on time. I never had a single one that wasn't resolved if there was a problem that the buyer felt like they didn't get what he wanted. Everything was perfect, except I had 17 sales that I had to cancel. That dropped me to below standard, which means they charge me an extra 6% fee until I
Wow.
get
Oh,
above
wow.
2%.
That's
So
that's interesting.
it's my own fault. It's my own fault. I mean, if I had known that they were going to do that, I would have tried to figure out a way around it.
Sure.
Hey,
I
Paul, it's off to Reddit.
Well,
Reddit world.
and Reddit is certainly, and I sell on Fred Miranda. Fred
Yeah.
Miranda is also a great place to sell higher end photo equipment because the people that are on there generally they've been there for a while and they're well known. And you did well on that 35 millimeter f2 Summicron that you
Yep.
sold on Reddit. I bought one, and you had a second one that you sold.
Yeah. Two. Okay. That was another thing. Part of the two Summicrons in that garage, just stuffed under bags inside of bags, inside of bags. I was like, what the hell is this? And I looked it up and
But there were no Leica bodies.
no, yeah. I think so. My suspicion is that he took some of the best things or things that were important to him for himself. But there's no telling, like, I mean, two 35 millimeter lenses and he didn't take one. Maybe he missed it. I'm not sure, but that's my suspicion.
Yeah. Well, there are other channels. Reddit is a good place to sell. Um, Fred Miranda is also very good because there are no fees involved in either one of them except for PayPal fees. So I've done fairly well. I've done very well on Fred Miranda, as both as a buyer and a seller. But I really don't buy much on eBay. I don't buy anything for resale on eBay.
Mike, if I can chip in with a quick observation that I've got down here in Florida, there was a time like 6 or 7 years ago when I first, because I mean, I've been collecting cameras and shooting, mainly buying cameras to shoot, not really collecting cameras since the 80s. And there was a time in the early 2000s when I could go on to Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, and Florida just seemed to be this charmed place where would retire and they'd come down to Florida and then they'd want to downsize and they'd want to get rid of their collections of their cameras. Or, a lot of people had come down here and then passed away and the relatives just wanted to get rid of cameras as quickly as possible. And through that, there was a time when I could find really cool cameras, but also amazing stories that went with it. Like I went down to St. Pete and picked up it was like a obviously cherished and well cared for Topcon Super D. And the guy had been he was a chaplain in the Navy in the Vietnam War. And this was his camera from when he was on the ship in the Gulf of Tonkin. And then there was another one. I got a Nikon F. It was like an early, it was like a 1967 silver Nikon F with a photometric meter. And it was a guy who was just a grunt in Vietnam, and he had picked it up while he was on shore leave, or on leave at one of the PXs. And so I was getting these cameras that had these incredible stories behind them. And it was kind of cool because you actually like develop relationships with these people, and it was all because of their cameras. But it really seems that post COVID, that all just dissipated. And I don't know whether it's because people now are of a certain age that they're just gone, and those cameras are just out of circulation, or whether it's just that people realized that there was more of a market for used camera gear. But I couldn't tell you the last year that I bought a camera through a local sale.
I think it ebbs and flows, like you mentioned, people go down to Florida and they pass away, or they're just trying to get rid of their old stuff. Like that's the first generation owner of these cameras are getting rid of them. And then that was, let's say 2005 to 2015, let's just say. I mean, no, that's a 10-year range,
Yeah.
but there was this dumping of stuff. And then, films made, like, I hate the word comeback because it's still like, 1% of all the market, but there's more interest in film now than there was 10 years ago. So people are snapping it up. I think there's more camera collectors. There's more people like us than there were 10, 15 years ago. So I feel like that initial wave of stuff that was there for the taking has been taken. And you're going to see a lull where anything that you could find cheap or easily is gone. But then maybe in another 5 to 10 years, some of those people will get burned out of collecting, or maybe they'll die or whatever. I don't know. And then maybe you'll start to see a spike of stuff reappearing on the market. But I feel like, we're in a lull right now of finding stuff as easily as you used to.
Yeah, I think on that top, like on the COVID topic, I think you saw an explosion of just with the lockdowns and whatnot. You saw chess,
People were
you
bored.
saw analog photography, you saw bread baking, you name it. It was just a return to just niche hobbies that you could get back into. So I think we're seeing the lagging effects. Like you say, I think it's gonna the market will come back, but I think that's what got a lot of interest in film photography, and why the prices got so high there.
The corollary is that it's just important to find your Paul. It's important to find the person that you can trust that has a collection.
Yeah.
There was a point probably around 2018 in which I was on eBay and I was looking for Kodak Retina 3C, and I found one that it was kind of this eccentric description of the camera as being as mint as possible, and it's kind of a hyperbolic description. But I took a chance on it, and I was the only bidder, and I picked it up for like $110. It shows up. It had this note in it saying, "I hope you treasure this camera. If you take any pictures with it, please share it with me." And so I shot a couple of rolls and picked a couple of the photos that I liked, and sent it to the guy in an email because he'd sent his card along. And the guy gives me this effusive, very nice letter back saying that my photography reminded him of the work of Man Ray, who he used to summer with in Paris. And that it turns out it was this guy named Bernard Dannenberg, and he was this eccentric camera seller on eBay who just happened to be one of the more famous art dealers out of New York in the 1970s. He had this massive success. He was actually the first person to represent Norman Rockwell in a gallery space. He put together the first U.S. touring exhibit of Norman Rockwell's work with the museum in Brooklyn. And he'd also represented Walt Disney, but he was mostly famous for having represented and been friends with most of the major movers and shakers in the Paris post-surrealist and Dada movement in the 1930s and 40s. And he was friends with Duchamp and was friends with Man Ray. And he had this one point where he thought he was going to be the world's most famous camera collector, and he was going to open a museum. He had a falling out when he tried to purchase the contents of the French National Photographic Society, where he'd actually that was gonna be the cornerstone of his museum, and the French Minister of Culture determined that he wasn't going to let the collection go to an American buyer, and refused to allow the sale to go through. And Bernard got angry and retired with his wife down to Florida, and he had this massive collection. He used to have, as an art dealer, he used to have agents that would comb the world looking for cameras that he wanted, that like the rarest, best possible examples of these cameras. And one time I bought a Kodak medalist from him, and it was not a medalist too, but a medalist, but it had a silver barrel on it. And I was like, Bernard, this, I don't find any documentation about this. This is different than other Kodak medalists. And he'd been working with a museum up in Rochester to document it. It appeared to have been an early prototype. It was like a pre-release prototype of a Kodak medalist that I ended up with. I ended up buying probably over a dozen cameras from Bernard, and they were all like I've got like two contacts, the 2A and 3As, and they literally looked like they came out of their box yesterday. It's like you took a time machine, like a TARDIS shaped like a Rolex or like a Rolleiflex, back to 1935 and brought back Super Iconta. And Bernard, he was an eccentric character. He was it was an interesting, kind of a prickly guy to deal with. But when you bought from him, you pretty much knew that you were going to get a really cool camera that was going to be the best possible quality, shootable service. He actually had a Tex on a retainer, and actually one of Paul's and my favorite repair guys, this guy named Alan Wade, I came across because Bernard had recommended him to me as the one guy in the country, actually in the world, to repair Kodak medalists. That he was the one guy he trusted with. And I asked Bernard one time, like, how many medalists he had in storage, and he couldn't even tell me. He must have had dozens of iterations of Kodak medalists in storage. But unfortunately, it appears that Bernard's just disappeared, and he probably passed.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of bring that up in regards to a Florida collection. I had to look it up because I couldn't remember, but episode 26, so actually exactly 50 episodes ago, was the one where we talked about Bernard called me up and said, I want you to go to the Ohio Camera Collectors Society auction that was coming up. And I deferred to Paul. So Bernard got in touch with Paul and said, will you be my proxy? I will send you money. He gave us a budget of how much money he wanted to spend and a huge list of cameras. And if you remember on that episode, we ended up getting none of them because the prices just went through the roof. I mean, even this is a guy with deep pockets, and it went even higher than what he was willing to pay in anything. So, but for those of you who remember that episode, yeah, that was Bernard. And like Anthony said, he's almost certainly passed away. I actually had his cell phone number because I had called him a couple times, and it's disconnected. So the unfortunate part of that story, well, I should be human. It sucks that a human being died, or most likely is gone. But the second suckiest thing about that is that he has a warehouse somewhere in the Miami area, we don't know where, that's probably wall to wall with incredibly rare cameras. And I've made attempts to get a hold of his daughter. I know he has a son that's in New York, but New York has a lot of people, and finding random people that you don't even know how to get a hold of is next to impossible. But if we ever hear about the fate of that collection, that would be, like, in my opinion, a huge influx of rare cameras would enter the used market all at once.
He sent me a 3-volume PDF of his documented collection. And I mean, it was like, you could look at the Wetzlar auctions and not see these cameras ever show up at auction.
and that was the problem with part of what he had. I mean, yeah, he had some Kodak medalists, he had some cameras that you can evaluate, but a huge number of items he had were one of a kind items where you can't even really put a price on it because there's nothing comparable. He would have like view cameras from the late 18th century that are like made out of gold, like just stuff that's so rare. How do you even come up with a price? It could be worth millions. It could be nobody could want it. You just don't know.
No, the buyer pool for it for a lot of that stuff is so small.
So small, right?
He had told me that he had relationships with buyers in places like China and Abu Dhabi,
Right.
uh, who were like buying select rarities off of him, and that he actually did the sales on eBay just to make friends, just to have something to
I'm
do,
gonna
just
talk to
to.
you. Mm.
I sold him a few things over the years, and I think I bought something from him once too. But
Kurt bought a bunch of stuff from him, and
yeah,
I know
Kurt
for a
did.
fact that at least two of the cameras I have were from Kurt through Bernard.
And
Yeah,
if anybody out there knows what happened to Bernard Dannenberg, please let us know. Because
yeah, we'd
Yeah.
I
like to
mean,
know.
I'd consider him, he was kind of a friend. There was a 4 or 5 year stretch where we emailed each other on a weekly
Yeah.
basis, and I shared photography with him and got, he was an incredible, I mean, he was an art dealer, and he would give me like wonderful feedback on my photography, and he would share his own photography because he also had a career as a professional art photographer and had exhibitions in Paris, and he'd share his work with me. And and then one day he just
It's
disappeared
gone.
from eBay.
Yeah.
And like you said, all the numbers are disconnected, and I had some private email addresses, and nothing has ever come back.
No.
So I mean, I can only assume that he's not with us anymore. But I'd really like some resolution. It'd be nice to know.
Yeah,
But I mean, again, this is, part of this issue is that, I mean, Paul doesn't want to sell cameras forever. He's talked about wanting to get out of the biz, and these resources. It's going to take a younger generation moving in and stepping up and taking this over. I hope that the next generation has both the eye for the cool, rare, functional cameras that Bernard had with Paul's honesty and ethics.
For sure.
and Cody was talking about what during the COVID that was sort of a heyday for sellers, and I can't tell you how many people I know who said, "Thank God for Kurt Ingham," because Kurt bought so many cameras from sellers during the COVID that he kept a lot of people alive. I mean, he kept them afloat because he was buying so much.
Well, and it was the unfortunate perfect storm of a pandemic and his health really deteriorating worse than we realized. But I can't tell you how many times going through boxes of stuff I would find invoices. I mean, to market auctions. I mean, you think of a big time camera seller, Flint's auctions, to market. Who's the
Wetzlar auction.
Wetzlar, was it Perfecta? It's in Germany or something. Is a
Wetzlar auctions. We both had things from
Yeah,
Wetzlar.
but what I'm saying is you would see the dates of when he
Yes.
bought this stuff. 2021, 2022, there was so much stuff. And he was buying stuff up until I think I shared this before. I was at his house after he had passed in his room cleaning it up, and his wife walked in with packages that were delivered that day, that he had ordered, and it from God knows where, that took 2 weeks to get to him, and he's passed away, and he was buying stuff right up until those his final days, and stuff was still showing up while we were there.
I was going to ask Theo, what's it like in Australia? Where do you buy cameras? I
Um,
mean, I know you don't buy
is
much. We'll give you I mean, unless it's a Mamiya 7, you're not really that interested in it, but
no, we tend to. I mean, there is a
Wait.
fairly healthy market here, as Mike takes a swig of whatever he's drinking there.
Mike is
Um,
drinking Irish whiskey, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
Irish
So
whiskey, is it?
from
Oh.
Paul.
yeah,
But look, the market's fairly healthy here, but Australia in general, especially compared to the US, is very expensive. So you don't get those great deals. Occasionally you'll come across something. But I tend to sort of concentrate on getting things in from Japan a lot because the actual shipping is fairly reasonable, and I know the stuff's going to be in pretty good condition. There is a few sellers in Australia that do quite well, and reputable ones, and make sure that things are clean and working when they do sell them, and look after their customers. And then you have the other side of the scale where there's the local camera markets where it's a little bit hit and miss on what you'll get. And sometimes you'll find good deals there, but they're disappearing very fast as well. And it shows that they're disappearing fast because their attendance to those camera markets is actually starting to fall significantly. So and you look at the world we live in at the moment, the cost of living is not exactly great, especially when I look around here. Sydney's one of the most expensive cities in the world, so it does cause a problem in terms of sales. But I do have a story. Yeah, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I do have a story of a great deal I got in Ohio, of all places, and it wasn't Paul.
It wasn't Paul.
So it was pre-Paul.
Midwest
Pre-Paul.
US is where it's at.
Yes. I was once having a bit of a look around on one of the groups on Facebook, and a gentleman by the name of Warner Granfield put up a post saying, "Oh, look, I've come across this Topcon RE Super, and it looks like a fairly good deal locally here in Ohio. Anyone interested?" And I've gone, normally I don't buy through Facebook that much because pretty much every deal I've bought through Facebook and the local Gumtree, which is the unregulated place, has had problems. So, but I thought, okay, this one looks interesting. So I said, yeah, I'm interested. And he put me in contact with the shop selling them, which was, I don't know if you know them, Paul, Acme Camera Rentals. And you never heard of them?
No.
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 And they sort of said, look, yeah, it was a Topcon RE, the 58 1.4, the 35 2.8, and the 100 2.8. And they said, $40 each, $160. I've gone, okay, that's not a bad deal. Shipping, it was before shipping getting really crazy from the US as well. So thought, great, sent the 160 through. They posted it. What they thought then at that point was, okay, we've got the 135 left over, the 50 macro, and these extension rings as well. So they packaged it all in and threw those in for free. And it arrived. And I mean, this thing is great. I've got it right here. It's fantastic condition. Works. The meter even works. It is really, really nice. And I thought, considering what they're selling now, that was an absolutely fantastic bargain. So I was quite happy. So I got an Ohio deal, and it was pre-Paul. Since then, I've got quite a few nice deals post-Paul. So which is pretty good too. Some of the other areas that you can get good deals around this part of the world is, if you come across some of the auctions, but they do have to be local. I did really well in the New Zealand auction. We've talked about it before, so I won't go through it again, but I ended up with a whole bunch of Super Contas and Voigtlanders and a couple of Superbs, one which is in Anthony's hands at the moment. So, and that's the famous one that sort of ended up in the gutter
Fell off
in
the truck.
Florida. Yes. So, which I think US Post is still thinking is lost. So, which is interesting. But
Were you ever able to get your money back from that, Anthony?
I
mean, you got the camera, so I guess you don't have a right to ask for the claim,
yeah,
but they did technically lose your camera.
they did lose my camera. They still believe it's lost. About once a year, I get a ping saying the camera's still lost, but they've never made an offer
Okay.
to settle on the insurance, and I haven't pushed it because I
got
feel
it.
guilty because I actually
Yeah,
have
yeah.
the camera. But yeah,
And I never heard the follow-up. Did you ever eat the Vegemite that he sent with it?
yes,
You did? Okay.
oh yeah, but
well, there you go. There's a great deal. I mean, you can't get better deals with
and
that.
the Tim Tams and all of the treats they all
Tim
got
Tams are good.
they all got eaten. Everything was appreciated. But
Yeah.
I mean, I like funky foods. I like weird misos and so Vegemite doesn't scare me.
Oh, Vegemite. Ooh. Vegemite is Marmite that's gone bad.
No, it's the nectar of the gods. Come on.
Well, while we've been talking a little while ago, we had another person join. Mike Litwin is here, and you've been on the show before. I actually looked it up. Last time you were here was episode 37. You're on mute though. So do you want to say hi? Do you have any stories to share with us?
Hey, Mike, listen, I've downloaded all your podcasts. I listen to you guys religiously. You are
Well,
a
thank you.
bad man. You are a very bad
Very,
man.
very bad. Very
You
bad.
have caused me. I started off as a Nikon collector years ago, but just as a Nikon collector. But because of your show, I've branched into rangefinders and 6x9s. And I don't know if you can see this, books. You see this?
Oh yeah.
This is a great book because there's not a lot of books out there on German cameras from the east side, from KW to Pentacon. I just got this from England. Oh, you get it while you can because someone had told me it was out of print. This was printed in 2019. So I'm very happy to get it because, like I say, you guys are bad. You Mike Ekman are very bad.
Well, in my defense, we're all bad to each other too. I mean, we are.
I know.
I have a package coming from Paul tomorrow. So
Yeah.
it's not easy. Knowing these. I
Hey,
mean,
if I could order from Paul, I would, but every time I check his website, it says not available in my area
where
because
are
I'm
you
in
at?
Canada.
You're in
Canada.
Canada.
Okay,
Okay.
Mike, I just changed that. I just changed to
Okay.
sell in Canada now. So
Okay.
if you see anything you want, let me know. Email or message me before you do it, and maybe we can.
Okay. Yeah, I'll keep an eye out because there
Yeah.
are a few things specifically I'm looking for. But I mean, I'm retired, I'm on a fixed income. And like I say, you guys have been bad for me because I've got bad gas. But I'm lucky. There's a few places here in Winnipeg, where I'm in Winnipeg, Canada, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. There's a few places that I can still find cameras inexpensively. And we are very fortunate. We have two independent photo shops here and I think one, maybe even two chains, national chains, Henry's, and of course, with the internet, you can order anywhere in the world. But I mean, locally, we have two stores, and one used to have quite a bit of used camera equipment, and I've done well there, but that place hasn't been cheap because it is a photography store.
Sure.
But I found a Nicomat, not a Nikkor mat, a
Yeah,
Nicomat
that's the Japanese one.
EL2.
Mhm.
That's the Japanese one, black body.
Yeah, the Japanese market Nickermats would often have different names. The Nicomat
Yeah.
is one of them, and I think they did that all the way from like the FTN all the way to the EL. Not the EL2, but it'd be the EL. You would find those two, and they're exactly the same. They just have the name
Oh
different, but
yeah.
it's kind
Well,
of a cool variation.
I started off as a Nikon collector years ago. I
Yeah.
have multiple Nikons.
Now that Paul has unlocked the seal, I feel like you're gonna. It's not gonna get any better for you. Sorry to say.
No, it won't.
And I have to admit, I mean, we've been talking about buying and selling cameras. I don't know that we've really ever thrown any gas at anybody yet in terms of particular things that we've been shooting. But what you've said, though, I've heard from other people before too. There was a guy I literally just sold some cameras to, and this is a guy who's bought from me multiple times. And every time I always throw something in, like additional in the box for him because I like the dude and I just want to get things in his hands. But I was like, hey, I got the podcast, would you be interested in coming on? And he's like, oh, I know you have a podcast. I've listened to it, but I don't know that I could contribute to what you guys know. I'm like, hey, you buy stuff. We want to hear your stories. But his name is Jay. He didn't show up, but maybe I'll get him to come on in a future episode. But he hates me as much as you do. So the
Oh, I
feelings,
don't hate you, Mike.
I know.
Like I say, your show is a great resource because I learn about cameras that I've never heard of, and I learn about lenses, and I learn what to buy and what not to buy, and what's recommended, and I appreciate that. I really do.
I do appreciate that, but I do have to say I would not be anywhere close to what I am in terms of my site or this podcast without all the other people that have contributed. I mean, Paul, Anthony, Theo, and I do this for fun, and we occasionally take breaks, and we have a standing rule that we've had since the very beginning is when this stops being fun, we'll stop doing the show. So the only thing that's mine about Camerosity is I chose the name. Johnny and I had the idea of creating a podcast where nothing was scripted and we just allowed anybody to join in. But beyond that, everything, the success that we've had is, these guys is equally responsible for your gas as well too. So This is
Well, you
very
know,
much
I listened to episode 75, the Pentex one, where you had
with hairs on.
Geran van Oosten on.
Yeah,
And after I heard that his book, the third edition was
third one,
out,
right.
I went and got it because the last two times I tried to get that book, it was out of print or
Yeah.
very expensive. And so I went and I got that. And then I went and got the KW to Pentacon, which I had been looking for previously, and found out that it was back or available because it was printed in 2019. So I don't think it's a reprint. I think they just discovered some copies somewhere.
Something. Yeah, he did. I mean, he told us that like old versions of his books will show up from sale here and there, but it's just best to buy the newest one straight from him.
Oh yeah. Well, that's what I did. I ordered it straight
Yeah.
from his eBay site.
Robert Shamebrook has credited us for seeing small bumps in his sales of his book. Mike Butkus told me after the episode we had him on that he saw a small uptick of donations. You know, people saying, I heard you on the podcast. So
I purchased Robert's book, Robert Shamebrook's book. That's an amazing book.
It is. The amount of information in there. It's incredibly technical. So I very much know that that's not a book for everybody, but if you have any interest in how Kodak film is made, or just to have an appreciation of what goes into this, it's absolutely worth it.
You have the book, the Zeiss book.
Yes, Larry Gubas's book.
Good. Yes, that's one of the hardest books there is to find, and
right.
I'm glad you have it because I really need it. When I just got these two pieces,
the two
contact ones. And Mike took one look. I had a crappy picture, and Mike says, "Oh, those are F type 7s." And I said, "What are you talking about?"
There's two different people who have graded them, so it just depends on whose scale you use. Because none of these are official things that Zeiss did. They sold that camera as the Contax. That's it. There are so many different subversions and variations that collectors have tried to come up with to differentiate between all the different versions of it. So 7 is like one method, type F is another person's method, and not everybody always agrees. But that's the last major revision to that camera. And like I told you, the way you can tell is the indicator for the shutter speed is a little triangle.
And there are four screws on the accessory sheet.
Yeah, there's a bunch of.
Those are the two tip-offs.
Right. But from a glance, that triangle is a dead giveaway. Somebody kind of pointed out, like I said, that's the one that's the most likely to work. I didn't mean that those cameras are most likely to work because a lot of them have died. But of the different types of Contaxes, if you're going to find one that might work, it's going to be the ones that you have. And you said they do, right?
They do. And it turns out Ray Nesson has one that also works.
Yeah.
He's bringing it to the show, so you're going to have 3 of them at the camera show.
3 of them. You're gonna oversaturate the market on
3 working Contaxes. So hopefully Igor is going to buy mine, so I don't have to worry about it.
And I'll still say this: as far as I know, Radu is still taking work. I've heard conflicting information that he does and he doesn't. Whether he does, he's going to take a while. He's not going to be cheap, but he's way cheaper than Mark Hansen wouldn't even touch the original Contaxes. Who's the guy out in California, or I don't know where he's at. The other Contax guy. He'll charge you $1,500 and he's got an 11-year waiting list. I mean, I don't think he'll be alive in 11 years. But if you have a Contax One and you want to get it serviced, do it now. Because I mean, there might only be one person left on the planet who can touch it. Because they say that, you know, like all Contaxes, they use silk ribbons that hold the shutter together. But on the original Contaxes, the silk ribbons are of a different size than the later ones are, and you need to have the right size. So just to even source the correct parts to be able to do it is not easy. But those are wonderful cameras. I believed the negative hype that they were inferior to the Contax 2 and 3. The originals never worked. They were super quirky. And if you could find one that works, they're a joy to use. I really, really like shooting mine.
Like you guys were talking before, it feels like the market, I know I used to find cameras everywhere here, thrift stores, auction, and now it's really few and far between, especially anything that's decent, you know. So, you know, and at one point, actually, I talked to a guy who did clean outs, and they were throwing stuff away.
Yeah.
I mean, I was talking about darkroom stuff, and he's like, no, we just throw that stuff away. I'm like, there's lenses on them. There's all kinds of these amazing things. So, I like with the almost sense of the equipment getting less in some regards, repair being more essential. I don't know. How do you guys feel about like the repair scene as far as getting stuff fixed now or the
Well,
future of
we're lucky because we have one guy that we all use him,
that?
and
Already
he
said
does
his
great
name.
work. Yeah, we don't want to say Alan Wade's name at
No,
Camera
don't say
Works in
Alan Wade's
Waterville,
weight.
New
No,
York,
no, no.
because he's sort of our own dirty little secret. But Alan's old school. He doesn't have a website. He does have email. He's been doing it for a long time, and he does have a very strong school business. So if you send him anything between like April and June, it's going to be slow. But other than
Yeah.
that, he does great work and he does it relatively quickly.
There is an uptick in newer people. Jess Ibarra's been on the show a couple times.
Mm.
There are a few younger guys learning to fix stuff. And depending on how you look at it, fortunately or unfortunately, but fortunately, they're there. Unfortunately, they tend to focus on just the most popular models, which makes sense, right? Like they're going to make more money servicing Leicas and Nikons than they're going to Zeiss contacts. So
Right.
to get rare things or the uncommon, the Alpas, the Tessinas, just obscure robots fixed is getting harder and harder. And we've said it so many times on this show, that day is going to come to an end. We may already be there now, but there is going to be a point where whole segments of camera collecting you can't get fixed anymore. But I think there will always be a demand for the Leica, the focal plane shutter, interchangeable range finders, the mechanical Nikons, mechanical Canons. I foresee us being okay for the next at least decade, hopefully longer than that. Of course, the electronic cameras are just going to disappear. There's going to be a cutoff mid to late 80s, maybe even 90, where almost everything after that just not going to work. Your Contax G2s, the Cosina Bessas from the early 2000s. There's going to be a point when those things just die, the electronic circuits just fry on them, the solder joints disintegrate. There's just not going to be anybody who will touch them anymore.
Yeah, Mike, apparently I need to go play the lottery because I have 2 working Pentax ES.
Yeah, even mine is catchy.
And my Rolly 35 SL E also is perfect working order. And all my Minox 35s work.
Here's a rare camera that never works. I have a working Konica FT1.
I've got a dead one.
Most people do. This one works fine. Well, for now.
What's actually interesting is in Australia here, we've probably got a disproportionate amount of people that do repair cameras compared to the US, population-wise, if you look at it. And I think it's related to what I was mentioning earlier that it's quite expensive to buy. Yeah, everything's got quite expensive here in the secondhand market. So what's happening, I think, is there's been a pop-up of quite a few people that repair, and they quite a few of them are actually younger. So I think, maybe the next decade you might be all right in the US, but then Australia's going to take over and charge you a fortune to actually get your cameras repaired. So we'll do that. But I've noticed we've got Mark Faulkner on. He's been a bit quiet today, and he's got quite a collection. So Mark, tell us about a good deal and tell us about how you get your cameras repaired.
I'll start with the repair part of it. That's a little bit easier because I tend to do a lot of it myself, especially if they're parts that are broken that I can 3D print or what have you to help get it back working again. They may not be the prettiest parts, but they do work and normally get cameras back operational again. Probably my best deal I've gotten is also probably my worst selling experience as well. It was relatively recent. There was an estate sale down in Southern Maryland, and they had a Leica M3 complete with all the boxes, lenses, documentation of when it was bought, everything else. It looked like a pretty cool kit, and I'd kind of always wanted to try one, even though I've got a few hundred cameras here and I hadn't really tried M3 yet. I was like, oh, if it's a good price, let me go ahead and give it a shot. And it was a good price. I conned a friend of mine into driving down with me about 2.5 hours down there to pick it up, talk to the guy, got it. It's good. It was in good shape, worked well, shot a couple rolls through it. I just did not gel with the camera at all. I'm glad I tried it, but I would take any one of my Canon rangefinders any day of the week over the M3. I know a lot of people love those cameras and say that optically they're amazing, but I didn't find it fun to use. So that might be a little bit controversial to some people. So I said, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and sell it. I know the market is kind of bad. I'll price it at a certain price, see if I get any bites on it. So I did. I got a bite within 12 hours of listing it and sold it. And it turns out it was to a camera store up in Pennsylvania. And the day that the guy got it, he all of a sudden said, "Oh, there's all this stuff wrong with it that I'm going to need to get repaired. So I think I've overpaid, and I would like to get the money back." And so I said, you know what, maybe I missed it. Maybe I didn't test everything on there. I'm oddly happy to give you a partial refund. So I did that. But the same day that I sent him the refund, the camera got listed on their site on eBay as in perfect working order. And when I contacted after the fact, he's like, "Oh, we got it repaired." I'm like, "How in the hell did you get it repaired within, the same, within 24 hours of receiving it?" And it was a whole thing. And I eventually just gave up. I didn't want to press too hard because, in all fairness, I made a little bit of money on the deal anyway, not as much as I would have if he kept the price.
Yeah. So you came out ahead technically, and
but it
on the
left
plus
a bad
side,
taste. Yeah.
with a bad taste. But on the plus side, you learned they're just not for you, right? Yeah. And I think that's important too, is that that's why I try to, I mean, I'm not just going to send a camera to somebody I don't know. I do have to build up some trust with people. Alyssa down in Florida, I sent something to recently, and any of the guys that are on the show, save Theo, only because shipping just sucks so bad. But like, if I have something that someone's curious about, I have no problem loaning it to them. And if anything, it'll tell them whether or not it's for them. Maybe I end up selling it to them, or they like, yeah, I didn't really like it, and I appreciate getting the chance to play with one of these, because now I'm not gassing for it anymore.
Yeah. Like I think you lent me a medalist at one point.
Yes,
that
I did.
was messing with, and I didn't gel with that one either.
Didn't gel, yeah, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, at least now you don't have to waste your money on something that you're not going to like if you at least get a chance to play with it. Anthony has learned his lesson with Hasselblads. He's not sitting there looking for, an SWC or something that he's jonesing to try, because he already knows he's not going to like it.
That being said, I got a good deal on another one somewhere around here. So I apparently didn't learn my lesson completely.
Or a Hasselblad?
No, medalist.
Okay.
Picked one of those up again.
Nice.
And just to prove the Camerosity effect, it looks like Mark, you got gas right in the middle of the show and ended up buying a book.
The book.
I did, yeah. Thanks to Mike over there. Yeah.
So I feel like anybody who saw the show announcement for the show is probably wanting us to cover like tips and tricks for like how to buy cameras. So I think we could do the low hanging fruit of eBay. And I'll start with my best tip, the best tip you'll ever have if there's a specific camera or something you're looking for, and you're not going to like this, but it's to be patient. With patience, you will find deals. I hear all the time people whining. They do this on Facebook. They do it on Reddit, even in the comments on my website. Cameras prices are too high. People are charging way too much, and they're right on a lot of things. But if you are patient, you will eventually find stuff. Utilize eBay's wish or watch list or their wish list, set up alerts. It could take you a year. I mean, I have a very respectful collection, and I had a very respectful collection even before I met Kurt. That made it worse, of course, but I had a decent amount of cool things that I got just by waiting. If you want a Mamiya sketch, they're pretty rare, but just be patient, and one day one will probably show up at a price close to what you could afford. And I'll even cheat and give 2 tips. It's build a network of people, leverage who it's not what it's who not everybody can be BFFs with Paul, Anthony, and Theo. Or even you, Mark. I mean, you've helped me out too. Knowing you and Adam, honestly, it would have never gotten me to the point where I would have grown to wanting even to do a podcast. And I say this a lot, but I have so many different people to thank for that I would never have gotten where I was without learning, meeting those people. So build a good network and be patient, I think, are the 2 best tips that I can get for someone who's looking to first get into camera collecting and wants to get some of the cooler models.
My sort of corollary to that, before November, when I had the cafe, I sort of put myself out there in the community, sort of like Paul's ad in the newspaper of, we buy cameras. I just, put myself out there as the local camera nerd who's interested in old
Yeah.
cameras. And just by being social in real life, face to face, and suddenly it's like, well, my cousin's got some old cameras. Let me see if he'd be interested in talking to you. And just by putting myself out there in my local community, I've actually found some incredible camera deals that way. And
Yes.
people, they bring great because they bring the cameras to you, um, which is always nice. But it just takes putting yourself out there, whether it's putting the ad in the paper or attending events, or if there's a camera and coffee meetup or whatever, or just like letting people know that this is your weird little hobby. Carry a camera around and people will see it and stop you and talk to you in the streets, and you'd be surprised at the connections you'll make and the cameras you'll find.
Well, too, like with especially with people that I work with. I work for a large transit agency here in DC, and I'll just have lenses and cameras randomly appear on my desk periodically because people know that I collect and shoot them, and sometimes I don't even know where they came from. Sometimes people will tell me. Other times I'll show up and they'll just be like a Nikon lens or something sitting on the desk. But one thing I would say about eBay is that I also tend to do searches for common misspellings of names of cameras,
It's a
and
good
that
one.
often will also lead to some fairly decent deals. That, along with I tend to gravitate towards listings that have really bad photographs for whatever reason, and it's worked out so far. Haven't gotten burned too badly, but those are probably my two tips for eBay.
Yeah, I was gonna say even Facebook Marketplace, Leica. Just misspell or just common transpositions of letters, etc.
Foatlander with an H.
Whatever, yeah.
Yeah.
You'll be surprised what pops up. Or just, vintage camera. Just generic,
Yep.
queries will
That's a good
yield
one.
some interesting stuff.
It's been a while. So this isn't a good tip anymore, but maybe one day it will be again. But places like KEH in Georgia and Roberts Camera in Indianapolis would a lot of times sell lots. So like I would search their store for the word lot, and it would just be like all as is junk stuff, but half of the time it was good,
Yep.
So you may have spent $150 and maybe 8 of them are garbage, but 2 of them are really nice, so that was a good tip. I love your tip, Mark, about misspelling, not that you're trying to take advantage of people, but if somebody doesn't know what they have, chances are they're not doing a very good job of explaining it, and therefore less people are going to see it. There used to be, or they still is, there's this a seller. For anybody listening to the show, I bet you've seen their listings before, but it's called TikTok and More. TikTok and More, I will tell you, is a jewelry store in Frankfort, Illinois. I've been there many, many times. And they do, I don't know where they get the stuff from. I've never figured it out because they're just a normal strip mall, very tiny jewelry store, but they have a crap load of stuff that they sell, and they get a lot of cameras. And I would end up just befriending the people that work there. I would say, hey, can I pick this up locally? They're like, yeah, sure, no problem. So I would go there and I would get some really, really good deals. Unfortunately, I think Anthony's bought stuff from them, not even realizing that they were local to me, but more and more people started like saving them as a saved or favorite seller. And it feels like the deals just aren't there as much as they used to be because there's more awareness, that this nondescript jewelry store on occasion gets a lot of Rolleiflexes. Any other tips people have?
Buy from Paul.
Buy from Paul, yeah. Well, I like the tip about being out in public too that Anthony said. Even today, today's Labor Day in the United States, so I was literally at a parade today, and I had a Nikon S3 hanging from my neck with a hippie strap. If someone doesn't identify the camera, they're gonna like the hippie strap, and you will just get people that will just make comments. And while it didn't happen today, a few people, they said, "Hey, nice camera." But on occasion, nice camera turns into, hey, my dad has an old camera that he's trying to sell, or something like that. Like on occasion, you'll run into somebody out in an IRL in real life, and they'll say, hey, oh, are you interested in cameras? I got one. Maybe that might be interesting to you, or something along those lines too. Garage sales, just bring your camera with you, shoot things, and be friendly. Be friendly is a big part of it too.
What about antique stores, like antique malls on the side of the interstate? Any success there from anyone?
No, never.
Probably like a couple of years ago, but not so much anymore. Like I feel like I used to have good luck going to a couple of them up in northern Maryland or into Pennsylvania, but more and more the stuff I find there is like, just little Bakelite cameras, things like that. And I don't know how much of it is that there's not as much stock anymore, or is it that my bar for what I'm looking for has also gotten a lot higher over the years. So it's kind of a toss up. Yeah.
There are two of those stores near me, and one of them is I think Dan Hausman used to have a booth at one of them. I'm not sure he still does, but one of our other listeners, who we all know, Mike McCreesh, wanted a military camera that was in one of those malls, and I bought it, went to buy it from him, and it was a terrible experience. I don't know if you ever bought anything in one of those places, but you have to go to a main office, explain to them what you want, then they try to figure out where it is, and you go and you can't really look at it, you can't really inspect it very well before you buy it. So I was not happy doing it, but it worked out okay. Greg McCreesh is who I'm trying to say, but it worked out fine for him. He got what he wanted. It was an unusual military type aerial camera, I believe. On Facebook Marketplace, you can find some good cameras, but it's really hard to police them. I have a feeling that it's getting more and more dangerous to buy from Marketplace.
I've never had a good deal through Marketplace. As in, there's occasionally you'll get something nice, but it's very much outweighed by all the bad deals that I've had in Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah, it's just too risky, I think, unless you can really make contact with the person and establish that, the same people, or you're able to
Yeah.
go and look at it. It's just a little bit too risky for me on high dollar stuff.
Yeah, I can never understand it because I see listings there sometimes and they're selling, the greatest camera in the world, the Mamiya 7, for instance, and it's like, $10,000 kit. And you go, oh, who's going to go and just buy it through Facebook? It's really bizarre. Unless they're local and they can actually go and have a look at the camera. That's a little bit different.
But today there was a guy today that had what did he have? He had a Leica MD-A, which is a camera I just sold today, with a 35, and he lists it a Leica MD-A with a 35 millimeter Elmar lens on it, and he puts it up for a particular price. Well, in the description, that's how he describes it. The pictures show it with a 35 millimeter Sumeron, so a totally different lens. So I emailed him and said, what do you have? Your description isn't the same. Turns out he's a listener of ours, and he just simply made a mistake when he typed out the description. The same thing happened on a guy with a Hasselblad super wide. He said he had an SWC with an A16 back, but yet when you look at the picture, it's an A12 back. Well, there's a big difference between the two. I mean, the people that buy that camera really want it with the A12, not the A16. So the camera wasn't selling because he had the wrong description on it.
Mike Litwin said, don't overlook repair shops. He said he purchased an original Asahi Pentax at my local shop. And honestly, that's actually worked for me too. There used to be a camera repair store in Palatine, Illinois called Lee's Camera Repair. And he had a shelf of stuff where he repaired stuff for an owner and they never picked it up. So, it's already been serviced and he never got paid for it. And now he just wants to get rid of it. And I picked up a nice Canon Flex for a very reasonable price that had a CLA. So that's actually, I think, a pretty good tip if you have a repair shop near you, though, of course.
Like, again, Winnipeg's a funny place. We used to have two professional camera repair shops. One closed, but we still have one. And he's the only shop here, he says, on the prairies. So the camera I purchased, it's the first ever Asahi Pentax, not the Cape, the first one. And he got it from a journalist in Thunder Bay who passed away. And because this was a professional journalist, he serviced all his professional equipment. And so when this journalist passed away, his daughter sold off his equipment, his personal equipment and everything. And so she sent it to him. And I just went in because I periodically, when I go by his store, I just pop in to say hi and take a look at what he's got. And I saw it and I made him an offer and I got it. And then someone was after, he had three lenses. One of them was the 85 1.8 Takamar, either Takamar or Auto Takamar, the first one. And the guy balked on it because it wasn't pristine, but the optics were excellent. And so I picked that one up.
Yeah.
And just it's serendipity. Serendipity is such a big thing in my getting cameras. And sometimes I don't know what it is. Like there was a Canon EF. I didn't know anything about a Canon EF. I went and researched it on your site, Mike, found out what a great camera it was. By the time I went back to buy it, it was gone.
Here's a tip. Another one. If you're ever negotiating with someone who wants to sell something to you and they say the word collectablend, just walk away. don't even try, because I don't. It amazes me how often that website comes up. Well, Collectablend says it's worth $1,100. It's like, yeah, but that was an auction from 18 years ago.
Are you saying it's not up to date, Mike?
No, it is definitely not up to date.
Collectablend, I believe, is Joe Geyer at Mint and Rare, and Joe is a great guy and he's really honest. But the only thing that Collectablend really does is it can show you what is actually for sale and at what prices they are for sale. Like he might have. I looked at something earlier today, and everyone, when they look at Collectablend, there are three different prices. There's
Right.
poor, medium, and mint, and everybody looks at mint.
Sure.
So they're going to say, okay, well, oh gosh, well, they said it was $10,000. Well, that's if it's never been used. And none of them that you're going to find are ever going to be like that. But also in the box, in that same listing, will be what is currently for sale. He'll
That's
sort
true.
through the eBay listings and all those things. So you can get some idea, but it doesn't really mean much. We were talking about that little PhotoFX camera that I have coming in tomorrow. PhotoFX Minifex.
Minifex. Yeah.
Minifex. And Collectablend shows that as being a $1,200 camera in mint condition,
Right.
and a $400 camera in decent condition. And if you look at it for sale, they're $200.
Yeah.
So it's just you can't really rely on it to get decent information.
This is not a secret tip at all, but if you want to at least come close in the ballpark to what something's worth, you got to go on eBay and choose the sold auctions. You usually have to hit more, check the box for sold, and at least that'll get you a starting point, but there's other variables like condition, what was included with it, is the description any good? I mean, if you're trying to sell, the tips are take good pictures, spend some time. You don't have to get a professional light box. I mean, that's nice too. When I sell stuff, I literally just lay it on the floor of my basement. So, I mean, people have seen what the texture of the carpet that I have. So I'm not making an attempt to do professional studio product shots, but I do make an effort to get clear, focused shots of every angle of the camera. If it's an interchangeable lens, I do one of the lens off. I try to get a picture of the film compartment. If there's any extras, just try to include all that. Like, include the stuff in what you're selling of what you would want to see if you were thinking of buying it, and do the best you can to describe it as you can. I mean, I've done that and I've still had things returned. I shared the story earlier. It's going to happen. Paul gave me a good tip. eBay, if you're in the US, I don't know if this applies to other countries, but if you're in the US, you can optionally choose to sell internationally. But even if you don't, eBay has the International Seller Program where you can't opt out of that. Or at least if you can, I don't know how. And how it works is people from other countries, usually China, will buy using a proxy in the United States. So it's technically a domestic sale because you're selling it to a place in Chicago or Kentucky, or there's one in Oregon, I think. So you ship it USPS, UPS, whatever, and it's usually reasonable shipping. It goes there. They then repackage that and send it internationally through DHL or some other courier to the end user. And it could take a very long time to get there. And sometimes those sales go bad. But the tip Paul gave me is whenever you see that happen, because you'll know, it's pretty obvious, this isn't actually going to where you're shipping it to, always choose signature required. And the reason that's important is that proves without a shadow of a doubt that it arrived where you sent it to. What happens to it after that is not on you. And it's happened to me before where I sent something It made it to where I sent it to. They did the signature required. Then it disappeared, never appeared. Maybe the guy did get it and he's trying to scam me. I never found out, but he did the item, never showed up, return on eBay, said I never got it. I want my money back. eBay opened up an investigation to figure it out, said, and they cited in my favor, and they said it arrived to where you sent it to, and their own insurance took care of the rest of it. So I was not on the hook for having to accept that return once it made it overseas. So if you're in the US and you're selling and you sell it to somebody, the buyer is clearly international through the eBay International Buyers Program, add the extra dollar. It's like $3.99, I think, through USPS for signature required. That will save your butt if there's a problem later on.
Just to expand on that, Mike, the advantage to that program is, as you say, you're shipping to Chicago or
right.
Me, I get shipped to Chicago. It goes
Glendale
to
Heights.
Yeah, it goes to either DHL or Ascendia is who they use to forward it. But the cool thing about it is, if the buyer gets it and wants to return it, you're out of the picture. There are no returns to you for any reason on eBay International Delivery. You're done. eBay will take it back from them. I don't have any idea what they do with it, but you're protected completely.
Right.
The only problem I've had with it is, and it's frustrating for me and also the buyer. I shipped a filter to a guy in Canada. What he got was an auto part. When it reached eBay's hub in Glendale Heights, somebody slapped the wrong label on it. So the guy in Canada gets a filter and gets a muffler rather than a filter. And so then, what happens after that? He has to send it back. They send him a label, but the filter is probably lost. It'll never get to the right guy. And there are some frustrations involved in it, but for a seller, it's great. It's easy, and you can't lose.
Yeah, I've not been burned once. I've not had a bad experience. I've had to deal with people claiming something didn't show up, but then you just say, you just tell them, mark it as not received. And assuming they're being honest and they just legitimately didn't get it, which is very possible, that you just tell them what to do. Once they do it, they'll get their money back and you're out of the picture, like Paul said. So
I sent 3 cameras to one of our listeners in Canada in the same box.
Yeah.
3 cameras. It got somehow or other, they got split up, they got opened up. The tracking showed they weren't around. It was nothing good happened. And so I just gave the guy his money back. It was a Canon Demi and a couple other little plastic. The VP Twin, remember the VP Twin?
Yes.
That we were discussing. Okay, it
Kurt
was
had
one
12 of those.
Yeah. And so I gave him a refund. Then they started showing up. So I shipped 3 cameras in one box. They showed up to him over a period of about 2 weeks, one at a time. We still don't know how they got them, how that happened.
That's weird, yeah.
But, so he just sent me money to pay.
I sent something to Alex Lakes, not even through eBay. I just mailed it to him. It made it. I tracked it. It made it into Canada. It cleared customs. And then a week went by with no updates. And suddenly the tracking said it's now back to me. Delivery refused or something like that. And I told him, I'm like, well, what happened, man? He goes, I don't know. I never got anything. Like it just didn't show up. And it got sent back to me. It was like, it wasn't damaged. I truly just don't know what happened. I joked with him and said, well, apparently the government doesn't want me sending you stuff. So, even though the United States and Canada share the world's largest unguarded border in the whole world, apparently getting boxes over that border to the destination is problematic.
You need a wall. You need a wall.
Yeah, build a wall to Canada. Well, we're running down near the end of this show. Anthony ended up having to drop before we lose any more people. Unfortunately, Robert Rodoloni was here, but we couldn't get his audio working throughout the entire show, so we never had a chance to really hear from him. It's actually been quite a while since he's had a chance to participate in the show, so I do miss chatting with him. But does anybody have any last minute thoughts or suggestions before we go?
Yeah, as a lot of listeners will heard, I went on a recent trip to Vietnam, which was fantastic. I took a Nikon F3 and an FM2N with me, as well as a folding 6x6 camera, and I had a blast there, which was great. Took some pictures. I did promise to say that I talk about the experience of getting film developed there, which was interesting in Hanoi. It cost like $3 to get it film developed and scanned. The scans were rubbish in my compared to what I was expecting. But the film, they actually process it and then they stick it back into the canister. So you end up with this little canister with a little bit of film sticking out.
So they just rewound the film back into the cassette?
That's correct.
Oh,
So,
wow.
Huh.
yeah, I should have said cassette. Thanks, but yes. So it was a bit strange. And then in Ho Chi Minh City, and I'm really glad I got my film developed there, including some Delta 3200. They develop and the lady serving me there said, "Oh, you do realize we don't cut and sleeve. We'll process, we'll scan." But then we just roll it up into this great big ball. And she showed me this big wheel of film of someone else where they just basically, one after the other, and you end up with this great big, wheel of film. And I said, "Oh, I don't really want to take it home that way. Can you at least put it back into the external canisters from the film?" And she goes, "Yeah, we can do that." So I ended up getting that there. So it's a thing where they don't seem to sleeve film at all. They do.
Yeah.
Now the scanning, as I said, was pretty average. I've rescanned them here, and I can see the huge differences. But yeah, I wasn't expecting much. I mean, for $2 or $3, you're not going to expect much.
Sure.
But it was great to get processed because on the way out from Ho Chi Minh City is the first time I've ever been pulled up on film where I've asked for a hand check and been told no. And the security guy literally came up to, within about an inch of my face. And he's telling me, "Oh, look, yeah, I can, we're going to scan it because, yeah. And if arguing, I'll show you the film where it proves that there's not, nothing happens to it." And I said, "Well, I can show you lots of films where it shows you it does." And I've had personal experiences of that. But I said, "If you show me the film where you can still put my film through the scanner." He goes, "Yes." I said, "Well, stop wasting my time." So by then, my wife Noelle's going, "Yeah, just agree with him, just move on here," because she can see I was starting to get a little bit frustrated there, because I don't tolerate people that well on that one, those kind of things. So anyway, I put it through. I had some unprocessed film, Delta 3200 left over and some Portra 800. I suspect those are, the Portra 800 might be okay, but the 3200 is probably toast. It was one of the old scanners, luckily, so that was a plus. I had two processed rolls of Portra 400, shot rolls of Portra 400 and FP4 in 6x6 format that had been shot as well. Had them processed. They seem to have come out okay. So it doesn't seem to have affected them to anything noticeable. But I suspect the Delta 3200, which I've got in the Nikon S2 behind me here at the moment, is probably toast, but I can't just throw it out. I wanted to give it a try and see what the effects are. But my advice there is if you're in Vietnam and flying out of Ho Chi Minh City, get your film processed there locally. They do a right job. There's a couple scratches here and there, which are a little bit annoying, but it's a lot better than having it scanned and destroyed. So
It's good to know.
yeah, so there's my report from getting film processed in Vietnam and bringing it back.
The one follow-up I had, as I mentioned, I think it was in the last episode about how I wasn't a fan of 58 millimeter lenses, the focal length. But at the time I'd said that I actually hadn't shot a lens like that in quite a while. So between these last two shows, I loaded up my Asahi Pentax with the 58 f2 Takumar, and then I also loaded up that Nikkor that Paul made me buy, the 5814 on my original Nikon F with a waist-level finder, and I shot rolls of film on two different cameras, both with 58, and in my opinion is unchanged. I was at a state fair or county fair, and I always just found that every time I composed an image, I felt like I constantly had to keep backing up. So that's just, not to keep ripping on 58 millimeter lenses, but I think that kind of proves that certain people, your mind's eye and how you picture an image to look, it has to match that focal length, and 58 just a little bit too long for me.
But Mike, if you're going to be an influencer, you need something. I've got the Topcon 58 millimeter here.
Yeah.
You need something with all that glass in front. You can't be an influencer without, having that shiny glass in the front.
That is probably one of the most highly regarded of that focal length lens. That Auto Top Core 5814 is just sharp, 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 sharp.
Oh, it's fantastic. I love that
Yeah.
lens.
Is this big enough? Can I be an influencer now?
There you go, Mark.
Mark just held up an aerial camera. Mike Litwin, you said you had a request.
For future shows, could you revisit third-party lenses? I had been hoping you would talk about Bosch and Lohm and Bushnell lenses and maybe Tamica lenses. I've picked up a few Bushnells, but I can't find out who made the Bushnells. And also on that Canon EF I mentioned, it had a 50 millimeter lens, but it was made by Sears.
If you look at a lot of the department store lenses, we talked briefly about Vivitar in that episode, and we went through the list of all the different manufacturers who made lenses under the Vivitar name. Any one of those manufacturers may have made those Sears lenses. And unfortunately, there's just no documentation to know for sure. So you may find one particular Sears lens that may have been made by Kiron, but that doesn't mean the next Sears lens was.
Bushnells were all made by Asanuma, though, Mike.
Okay, they were okay.
Asanuma made all Bushnell lenses. Asanuma later became Kiron.
Yeah,
Okay.
Asanuma was you had mentioned, Paul, was like the first big third party that made a lot of lenses for other people. So yeah, that's a great request. The answer I'll give to you and everybody, whoever gives a request, is we need people to talk about it with us too. So I don't have a ton of experience with third party lenses. All right. Well, I wanted to, thank you guys, everybody, for coming in. Will, it's good to see you. Cody, welcome to the show. You are welcome back anytime. Don't feel like you have to sell more things to Paul to come back. We just like hearing people chat with us. Tell us what you've been up to lately. Mark, it's always good to see you. And Mike Litwin, welcome back. You've been on the show before, but it's been a while. I'm glad that I write down the names of people who join these shows, because that way I can search and remember when I saw them last. We don't have a topic yet for the next show, but we should be back to our normal 2-week cadence of recording. So that means the next episode will be recorded on Monday, September 16th, or for Theo, Tuesday the 17th, at our usual time. As always, the topics and discussions on the Camerosity podcast are influenced by you guys. So if there's ever something you want to hear, don't wait for a show to be themed about it. Just join us and ask us questions, share us your gas, give us gas. Anything goes. But you guys have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you
Bye.
very much. See you guys.
Good night.
Hey guys, it's Bill Smith from Classic Camera Revival. It is still summer where we are recording, although by the time you hear this, it'll be after Labor Day. We got a very special guest. If you are not familiar with Camerosity, it is the fount of wisdom for all things camera geekery, and we're very fortunate to have Paul Reibold come join us this evening. So without further ado, let's just roll the intro